IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. The partition of India in 1947 was a traumatic and violent time for ordinary Indians who had to move across the newly demarcated borders. Millions of people died, lost their homes, and had to settle down in a new land. Most of all, it showed the barbarity of man against man. A lot of fiction has been written about partition, capturing the ethos and the pain of those times. One such novel, Khooni by Nanak Singh, the eminent Punjabi writer and public intellectual, has just been translated into English as Hymns of Blood by his grandson Navdeep Suri. The novel shows how old entrenched relationships in a small village, Chakri in West Punjab, can collapse and turn violent in the face of hatred and bigotry, a theme that is particularly relevant for our times. Navdeep Suri, who's our guest today, is a diplomat and was India's ambassador to Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and also High Commissioner to Australia. He has also translated other books by his grandfather. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Navdeep Suri.
Thank you, Sidharth.
Navdeep, quick question. You were a busy diplomat. When did you find the time to translate these books?
There's always time that can be eked out of a busy schedule if you are determined. I think time management is a skill that all of us acquire over the years. But this particular book, Hymns in Blood, has mostly been translated after I retired from the diplomatic service. The three other books that I translated, including the last one, Khooni, Vaisakhi, was done mostly at work while I was working. But, there's an evening free. You sacrifice on social engagements, you sacrifice on a bit of leisure time, and you're able to take the time out for it if you set your mind to it.
That's very inspiring and slightly intimidating at the same time for those who want to be or are writing, because we somehow find that we never get the time. So I'm sure a lot of people must have been interested in what you just said. What motivated you to translate your grandfather's books? Did you think of books by other writers too?
I haven't yet. There's a door open for that. But I'll tell you, my grandfather, Nanak Singh, was quite a remarkable individual. He was pretty much unlettered, didn't get formal education beyond fourth grade in school, was orphaned when he was barely 9 years old, and yet produced a staggering 58 books, including 38 novels. And some 10 years back, my mother, who was a lecturer in Punjabi at the Khalsa College in Amritsar, used to always sort of rib me on it that, look, your grandfather was such a natural storyteller, but his fame is limited only to Punjab. And you're the only guy in the family whose English is halfway decent. So why don't you try and translate one of his books and let's see how it goes. And that was the beginning of that journey about 11 or 12 years back. And the first novel that I translated was Pavitr Papi, which was also a celebrated film in the 1960s with Balraj Sahni and stuff. And it was published as The Watchmaker. So that was the start of this journey.
Of course, Pavitr Papi became well known beyond the borders of Punjab when it was made into a movie. Unfortunately, the movie did not do that well, but it's well known. But of the many books you translated, it was the one in 2019, centenary of Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Khooni Vaisakhi. Now, I understand, I remember when the book came out, it got a lot of attention, a lot of reviews. As I understand, your grandfather was there.
Yes, he was. And I think that's what makes that book so remarkable. He was a 22-year-old in Amritsar, had a bit of a penchant for poetry, was getting involved into the nationalist movement, and showed up with two of his friends at Jallianwala Bagh on that fateful 13th of April, 1919. And he had gone very clearly, not to celebrate Vaisakhi as some people think, but to protest against the Rowlatt Act. And when the firing happened, both his friends were killed. He himself was knocked unconscious in the stampede. literally walked away from the dead and wrote a searing ballad called Khooni Vaisakhi, first published in May 1920 and properly banned by the Brits, all copies confiscated. And for us in the family, it was lost to us for the next 60 years until my father, through a series of coincidences, got hold of a copy in 1979 and republished it after that gap of 6 decades as a lost work that had now come back to life. And so when the centenary was coming up, it was again my mother who was after me that, look, this is a famous poem and this, what better time? And I kept protesting. I said, look, I've never translated poetry. I don't know if I have the feel for it. But anyway, I guess some persistence, some improvisation, and eventually it brought Khooni Vaisakhi to a much larger audience than we ever imagined.
You know, when the book came out, I got a chance to read some of it. And I remember that it was, to put it mildly, heartrending. So he was there when the shooting began. That must have been something for a 22-year-old to witness, people falling all around him, the cries, the pain. How did he translate that into verse?
Well, I think there's no better way than for me to perhaps just pick out a section and read it. I'm happy to read the English translation, and if for you to see how it goes. The book itself, the poem, is a chronological narration of that fateful first fortnight of 1919, and it sets the context first through a series of poems before coming to this dramatic time when General Dyer enters the Jallianwala Bagh and orders the firing. And it starts, 5:30 sharp, the clock had struck. Thousands gathered in the Bagh, my friends. Leaders came to lament the nation's woes, taking turns to speak out loud, my friends. Voiced grievance, hardship, anger, sorrow, saying no one listens to us, my friends. What can we do? What options left? Can't see any ray of light, my friends. Those words forlorn, they barely voiced, came soldiers thundering down, my friends. At Dyer's command, those Gurkha troops gathered in a formation tight, my friends. Under tyrant's orders, they opened fire straight into innocent hearts, my friends. And fire and fire and fire they did. Some thousands of bullets were shot, my friends. Like searing hail, they felled our youth, a tempest not seen before, my friends. Riddled chests and bodies slid to the ground, each one a target large, my friends. Haunting cries for help did rend the sky. Smoke rose from smoldering guns, my friends. Just a sip of water was all they sought. Valiant youth lay dying in the dust, my friends. That narrow lane to enter the Bagh, sealed off on Dyer's command, my friends. No exit, no escape, no way out was left, making Bagh a deathly trap, my friends. A fortunate few somehow survived, while most died then and there, my friends. Some ran with bullets ripping their chest, stumbling to their painful end, my friends. Others caught the bullet while running away, dropping lifeless in awkward heaps, my friends. In minutes, the bags were strewn with corpses. None knew just who was who, my friends. Many of them did look like Sikhs. Amid Hindus and Muslims, plenty, my friends. In prime of their youth, our brave hearts lay, gasping for one last breath, my friends. Long hair lay matted in blood and grime. In slumber deep they sleep, my friends. Says Nanak Singh, who knows their state, but God, the one and only, my friends.
Yeah, so it evokes the horror of what must have been, what must have happened, and what he saw, which makes it even more frightening in some ways, and more
Graphic.
brings to life.
Yeah.
Just in passing, I was there about 3 months ago, and I'm afraid I had visited after 25 years or something. Some of that spirit and that mood is gone. I suppose it's in keeping with the times, though one would like to be a bit more uncharitable about it. But this is not the venue or the time or the place. But Jallianwala Bagh is something that all of us in this country do know. Now, coming to Khoon Sole, again, what struck me was that, in a sense, your grandfather, Nanak Singh, was a Sutradhar, almost a journalist, writing about the big events of his time. Uh, to some of them, he was an eyewitness, and some of them he perceived because that he was so steeped in the mud and the soil of his native land. So, Khoon Ke Sohle, I found, was heartbreaking and depressing. Quite honestly, you see the breakdown of a society. And of the many books that he has written, why did you pick this one?
Okay, let me just rewind first for a moment to the comment that you made about Jallianwala Bagh. It's a place that I remember as a kid growing up, and going to the Jallianwala Bagh whenever some relatives would come or whatever. And my enduring memory of that place is walking in and getting into a really solemn mood, and there was a sobriety about it, and there was this moment to reflect on what had happened there in April 1919. I went back there after the sort of Disneyfication and wrote a pretty angry piece about it. I think I called it a desecration of a sacred site, the thoughtlessness with which the modernization has been done. I mean, nobody argues that you need decent toilets and other facilities, or you can explain the context in a more interesting way. But I think what has done over there is really playing havoc with sacred history. And I certainly have voiced my objection to that. Coming to Hymns in Blood, by the time partition happened, two things need to be kept in mind. Bauji was already, my grandfather was already a celebrated writer. He had published bestsellers like Pavitra Papi and Chitta Lahu already by 1947. He did a stint in jail in 1922. And that's when he got access to Munshi Premchand's novels. And he was deeply influenced by Munshi Premchand. And the first 2 or 3 novels that he read, his instinct was, I found my calling in life. This is what I want to do. I want to write novels which will reform society. And so what I tried to do when I was sort of done with Khooni Vaisakhi and looking for the next one, I was mindful that, the 75 years of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav is coming up, and it's going to be celebrated. And in those celebrations, isn't it important that we also pay some heed to the price that was paid for that independence of India? And so I started looking at Bauji's novels on the partition, and he wrote 4 back-to-back in quick succession. 2 of these, Khoon De Sohle is the first one, published in February 1948, gives you a glimpse into a facet that we didn't know too much about, of what is the texture of life in a rural area in what's now Pakistan, near Rawalpindi. What was the community like? How did they live? And those kind of intergenerational bonds that had developed between the families, regardless of religious faith, how they celebrated all the festivals together. And then the events that led to the mass movement. So that's the first one. The second one, which I am now taking up, is Agdi Khed, which is a sequel to Khoon De Sohle. And Agdi Khed, again, is set in the same period, the last 1 year before independence, or the last 1 year before partition, except that Agdi Khed is set entirely in Amritsar, and it shows you the other side of events cascading to a point that the Muslims of Amritsar are forced to flee, a city in which they had lived for generations. And I think, again, many forget that Amritsar had almost like a 35% Muslim population in 1947. So these two books, I thought, are extremely relevant, um, not just because they coincide with the 75 years of independence, but frankly, I'm also a little concerned about the new intent to declare August 14th basically as the horrors of partition, the remembrance of the horrors of partition. And I don't know what kind of impact it's going to have. Is it going to be more divisive, or is there going to be a message of healing? Because to me, the message that clearly comes through the two novels that I'm translating is one where the partition was terrible. It was an immense tragedy, but there's an embedded message of healing within that as well. And that's what I hope that will carry to the readers when they read these books.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Dugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Welcome back to the Wire Talks. You know, the book begins with a kind of flirtation between a village girl and a boy. And you already, I felt that there was a kind of, in that flirtation, there was a statement in which the boy says, oh, you'll listen to those Hindus, but not to us Muslims. And so it was already evident that the communal poison is getting into the system by then. But when I read the book, it struck me that even in the middle of all that ugliness, there are traces of humanity. The Babaji, who's a village elder, for example, shows the ability to withstand all the hate. So clearly the author had faith in the innate goodness of people.
Yes, and I don't think it's just coincidental. I think what Babaji used to do very effectively was use his storyline and his characters to give out a message that he wanted to give. And in this book, there's no dilution of the trauma of partition. It's fairly graphic, particularly in the latter part of the book. But at the same time, some of the strongest characters in the book are also Muslims who are willing to give up everything to save their Hindu neighbors. I mean, you have this remarkable Chaudhry Fazl Karim, who takes a false oath on the Quran to persuade the marauders that this Baba is not taking refuge in his house. He has given refuge to the Baba and his family in his house. But when they come looking for the Baba, he says, I swear by the Quran that I'm not hiding any Hindus in my house. That shows you the character of the man, that he's putting his friendship above his religion in a sense. And the way he tells his son, Fatah, that you are going to go and escort them to safety, no matter what. And the fact that 10 or 12 young, sturdy Muslim youth from the village are given the task of accompanying them and escorting them to safety. Again, despite the fact that Chaudhry's own house is burnt down as vendetta for having given refuge to the Hindus, shows you how strong those bonds were and the character of some of these individuals. So I think when you read the book as a whole, and that's true for the second one as well, what you come away with is not a black and white story that I think has become the norm, but the nuances within it of people who put friendship above everything else.
The story of that one village is the story of India as a whole, because this same thing happened in thousands of villages all across West Punjab, Indian Punjab, possibly in Bengal too. Uh, so, but more than that, which we have read in our history books, more than that, it's the story of India since then also. And I felt that Khoon de Sole, I don't know how you felt while translating or what your motivation was, but I felt that the book, Hymns of Blood, is particularly relevant to our times today. Did that play on your mind at all?
Very much so. In the process of writing, translating that book, kept reminding me how much we need that message in these times. When you read the foreword of the novel that my grandfather wrote, he says, anyone who knows me, I was a nationalist who was doing everything for India's independence, and I longed for the day when we would be an independent and united country. And today, I have to sit back after having witnessed the horrors and say that as India is celebrating independence, I ask the question, was independence worth losing our humanity as a people? What we did to each other? And it's a very profound message that comes through, not only in his foreword. My own experience, Sidharth, not to go very far, I was born in Amritsar, grew up in Amritsar, and Amritsar today has virtually no Muslim identity. And this was a city that had a large, thriving Muslim population. It had mosques, it had bazaars, streets with a very Muslim character. But the wrenching of communities as a result of the partition was so complete in Punjab that growing up in Amritsar, I remember maybe seeing the odd Kashmiri or the odd Afghan trader who would come to Amritsar because those were the old trading links. But short of that, there were no Muslims that we interacted with. That othering of the communities had really happened. And the remarkable thing today, if I come back to the present time, is that while in other parts of India, maybe the further you go from the border, you see much greater resentment and angst and communal sort of tensions, Punjab itself seems to have gotten over it. The state that paid the most extreme price for partition does not seem to harbor the kind of resentment towards Muslims across the border. And if there's a peace constituency in the country, you'll probably find it stronger in Amritsar than almost anywhere else in India. So, it also shows you the capacity of people to rise above or get beyond that tragedy and say, okay, we know it happened, and how do we now get over it and move beyond it?
I once again would like to focus on the allegorical part of this particularly relevant book about partition and what happened among people to something that is happening, a lot that is happening today, lynchings, the othering of minorities, the constant political establishment is constantly pointing fingers. Muslims are finding they are being economically squeezed. So the horrors of partition are very much with us today.
Yeah, it's depressing, Sidharth, to see that, the kind of issues we are moving on. One day it's the hijab, the other day it's the halal, the third day it's even Urdu language. It's almost as if a language has a religion. And the narrow-mindedness of some of the proponents of these ideas really is disturbing. I feel that it strikes at the heart of the idea of India that we cherish, but certainly the idea of India that my grandfather and people of his generation fought for. In his own autobiography, he says at one point that I have tried through my characters to create a sense of unity or amity, at least, between the different communities, Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. Wherever I've had a storyline, I've tried to insert characters that will bring up that element. So he was very conscious of his responsibility and duty as a public intellectual of that time to send out a certain message. But I think over the years, we seem to have lost the plot on that. And there's that old saying that those who forget the lessons of history are destined to repeat it. And perhaps we are falling into that trap. We've forgotten the horrors of the partition. We've forgotten what could happen to societies when communal passions are unleashed. There are no winners. Everybody ends up poorer for it.
So, is Khoon de Soile available in Punjab? Is it being read, you think? Or maybe the other novel which was set in Amritsar?
Look, Khoon de Sohle and Agni Khed in their Punjabi editions remain classics, as are many other of my grandfather's novels. They remain in print. Many of his books are part of the school curriculum, the college curriculum, university. It's basically like if you're studying English language and you have to read Hardy and Dickens. If you're studying Punjabi at any level, you have to read Nanak Singh. There's no getting away from his works, and thank God for that. The English translation has just come out, and I think it should hit the stores about now. It's been available on Amazon for a couple of weeks, and I certainly hope that it catches the imagination of a younger generation. But honestly, the readership for this book really isn't limited to Punjab, right? I think it's if anything, it's more relevant for some of the other parts of our country, which need to take a pause and reflect on where we are heading.
Well, one can only hope that is the case, because the madness one sees around, I don't know whether anyone wants to. That's not strictly true, but when I say a lot of people don't want to be reminded of the madness that's going on. So, but I have complete faith that there are enough people in this country who will want to know more about these books, and more about those times. Actually, there is an upsurge of partition literature in many ways: memories, memoirs, personal histories. So maybe in that sense, this also will contribute to the debate. What is next for Navdeep Suri, now that he's not a busy diplomat, but still busy, I'm sure?
Yeah, still busy. As soon as the dust settles on this one, I will take up Agni Khed, which is a sequel to this, and you'll see some of the characters from this book reappear in the second one. And to me, the second one is equally sort of gripping and gives you a very different perspective of the mood in Amritsar in that fateful year before partition. And there's a very interesting beginning for the book about this idealistic young Sikh who I think is modeled on the character of my own grandfather, who has founded an Ittihad Sabha. And the idea of that Ittihad Sabha is to try and quell the rising communal passions. And obviously, he's fighting a losing battle as he starts with that. So I hope that I can get that second book done in the next 6 months. But beyond that, I continue to retain my strong interest in foreign policy, which I did for a living for the last 36 odd years. I'm with the Observer Research Foundation, and I read, write, speak on the Middle East. I write on the Indo-Pacific, generally try to contribute to a more informed discussion on foreign policy issues.
Yes, all very important things. Navdeep, just one last winding up question. Punjabi literature is a treasure trove of great books. Do you think more and more translations will come out?
I think it's imperative. I don't know how many people are doing it. I certainly feel that we need to do a lot more in terms of translation, so that there's nothing like books to bridge cultural divides, right? The misfortune, I think, is that Punjabi or Gurmukhi language as a language is shrinking rapidly. Even in Punjab, you find lots of young people who today will converse in Hindi or who can't read Gurmukhi. They take it as mandatory up till 5th grade or 8th grade, and after that, they're done with it. And it's that loss of a linguistic identity that I find is deeply worrisome. Can we do more to preserve it? I don't know. I certainly hope so, because Punjabi is such a vibrant language. It's interesting, some people are making that effort also to use transliteration to reach a much wider audience, because the spoken Punjabi is pretty much the same from the 2/3 of Pakistan, which is Punjabi, all the way to Delhi, to the Punjabis in Delhi. But the written script obviously changes. So I think if we can do, and there are now technical tools available that enable you to do that fairly efficiently. So maybe, the idea would be to expand the market for Punjabi literature and reach newer constituencies.
May there be many more. I can't read Gurmukhi, but I confess that I didn't grow up in Punjab, but happily can and read Hindi fairly extensively. So that's my tiny kind of face saver, if you will. But I'm glad that these books are being translated, and I'm glad that you have translated these particularly critical books with a critical message for our times, that communal hatred can only produce a lose-lose situation for everybody. So thank you, Navdeep. I personally have read Khoon de Soleil, Hymns of Blood, which is going to be in the bookshops any day now. And it is a novel that reminds us that ordinary, decent human beings can suddenly violently turn against their friends and their neighbors and people they've grown up with over generations. And that's a message that is very, very important in India of today. Once again, thank you, Navdeep, for joining us and telling us about these books. That was Navdeep Suri, India's ambassador to many, many countries, a strong voice in the foreign policy circuit, but also a translator of some extremely important novels that happen to be written by his grandfather. We'll be back once again next week with another guest. Till then, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks team, goodbye.
Thank you, Sidharth.
You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people, and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcasts Network. On Cyrus's Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Ayushi, Nivedita and Abbas address the rumors about Putin having blood cancer and discuss how an American cat owner won ₹95 lakhs in a settlement. Is the Taj Mahal a Hindu temple? Esteemed cultural writer Rana Safwi weighs in on this debate with Sidharth Bhatia on The Wire Talks. On Smarter with Sid, Sidharth ponders whether it is okay to take a nap during working hours. On Marathi Khidkitun, the Deshmukhs talk to Marathi actress Amruta Khanvilkar about her new film Chandramukhi. And on Ek Chuski Finance, Priyanka explains why research is a must in making financial decisions. We've got some exciting news for you. IVM Podcasts has just launched its merch, and our first line is out now. Head to the IVM Podcasts website and click on the shop tab to check out our first collection of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Don't forget to rate us on any platforms you're listening on. You can also check us out on YouTube. We are also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We would really appreciate if you could spare a few minutes to fill it. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance and Jupiter, a digital banking app.